Hi guys, in this video I'm going to talk about user-defined functions. Before we do that, I just want to remind you to go to Excel VBA SQL and you can download all the working Excel workbooks with all the code in it, so you don't have to write the code, and you could watch all the videos here as well. excelvbaSQL.com. And if you have questions, you could contact me on this contact link here. Okay, so today let's talk about user-defined functions. And you should know already what a function is. A function is, you could think of it like a machine. It takes some input and it gives some output, right? You just pass in something, it passes out something. And you know about functions if you've used Excel. So sum is the name of a function that takes a number or a range of numbers like this and it just sums them up, right? So this function is called sum. It has a name and it returns a number. So it has a type, right? We talked about types before, like variable types or function types. So functions have a type too. So this function has a type, I think it's double, but I'm not sure. But you could see that it returns a number with decimals. So I would say it's probably double. Okay, so functions have a name, they have a type, and they also have parameters. So here's the parameters. Whatever is in parentheses, those are your parameters. And the parameters have a type as well. So these parameters are of type, I believe, they have to be double as well, I think. So the function is of type double and the parameters are of type double too. I'm not positive on that, but you get the idea that a function has a type and the parameters have a type too. So you could see that if I put something else here like SD, okay, so maybe this proves that that this parameter is not of type number because I could put in anything, right? Let's try something else here. Let's just see if I could do some D. Okay, so if I put just some D in here, then it doesn't read it, right? It has to be a number. If it's a single parameter, it has to be a number. It cannot be a string. So you get the idea, right? Is that behind the scenes, what Microsoft is doing is, it's saying it somehow can read that it's a single parameter and it's a string, and it errors out because it can't do it. You can't sum a letter, right? But Microsoft Excel is smart enough to go, okay, if you pass in a range of numbers, a range of anything, I'm just going to sum the numbers. So that's what it does here, right? So I could type stuff, we're learning about Microsoft Excel here, but Microsoft Excel is pretty smart, right? Look at, you can pass in numbers or letters and you still get the sum of the numbers. So you get the idea, right? That functions have a name and they have a type. For sure, this is going to return a number. So we know the type of this function is a double, probably. What we don't know is what does this type have to be? It looks like it could be anything if it's a range, but it has to be a number if it's just a single value, or else it's going to error like that. Oh, actually. Okay, so this is kind of now it's getting interesting. Is that Microsoft Excel is really smart. You could pass in a address of a cell, and if it's a letter, it's going to return 0. Okay, but if you put in the same DS DAF, it's going to error out. And let's see if we surround it by quotes, it's probably going to error out as well. Sure. Okay, so we have all kinds of stuff going on here. But you get the idea is that this parameter is pretty important, right? Based on that parameter, you can do stuff, right? And how is it doing that? Well, we're going to try to take a look at that. But what it's doing there is looking at the parameter. And we're going to do the same thing. So how are we going to do that? Okay, let's take a look. So let's put some numbers in a column like this. And what I want to do is scale all these numbers by 1,000. So I want to write something that will return something like this. So in Excel, you can write a formula that does this. Equals this divided by 1,000. But now I want to do this as text. So I want text. And what I want, so this text general, that just turns this value into text. And I'm doing that because I want to append something to it. So I want to do this. I want to scale these numbers by 1,000 and then put K at the end of it. Okay? And if I copy this formula down, it surely does that, right? You see that here. Now that's pretty cool, right? But it's sort of cumbersome because, as we'll see, you know, when I want to make changes to the logic of this, I'm going to have to write extremely long formulas in here. And the better way to do this, if you wanted to do something like this, scale stuff, or in any case that you run into that you're writing a super long formula, it might be easier to just write a user-defined function. Okay, so a user-defined function is just like that sum function, right? It has a name and it takes parameters, or it might not take parameters, but like for instance, a function that doesn't take parameter is this today function, right? So there's functions with parameters, without parameters. They don't need to take parameters. But in our case, we want to take a parameter. We want to take a number, and we want to return something that will look like this. Okay? So how do we do that? Let's write a function. And it's called user-defined function because we, the user, are going to define the function. So let's go into the environment and insert a module. And when you write a function, you know, before you saw that I did stuff like sub test or whatever. Now, instead of sub, you want to do function. So you do function. I'm going to name this function scale num. And if you don't have any parameters, you know, you put these parentheses. You have to put these parentheses here. If you don't have any parameters, you leave that blank. Okay. So now I have a function called scale num, scale number. Right. You can name it whatever you want, and it has no parameters. And notice what happens already. Is that if I go to the Excel sheet and I just do equals scale and I start typing, there it is. That's the function I just wrote, scale number. And you put your parentheses, and it returns nothing. This is just, let me format this as a number. Actually, no, I'll leave it as general. So you see, this doesn't return anything. It just has 0 in it because the function, since there's something in the cell, it's going to be 0 if it doesn't return anything. Okay. So now let's write some code so that we can do this. Okay. So I want to take a number. So here, when I say take a number, that means I'm going to have a parameter. But first, I need to define the type, right? So this scale number is going to return a string. There we go. This is the proper way of declaring your function. Scale number is the name of the function, and it returns a string as a string. Now I want to pass in a parameter, number as double. Okay? And now I can work with that parameter. Just like that sum function we saw earlier on and we were playing around with. And if I do a parameter that's a range, and if I do a parameter that's an address or whatever, Microsoft Excel was very smart. It was taking that parameter, whatever I passed in, and it was looking at it and going, okay, what type is this? It's a range. Okay, then I can accept numbers and letters, and I'm only going to sum the numbers. Okay, and it was doing other things if the parameter was different. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do something like this. We're going to do, when you write a function and you want to return a value, you write the name of the function, scale number, is equal to, and we're going to do number divided by 1,000. And then we are going to append the letter K to it. Okay? Now this is not going to work, and I'll show you that it doesn't work, because if I run it now, and when I say run it, I just mean use it on your worksheet. And it knows you don't have to save anything or do anything. As soon as you change your code in the environment, you can just drag it down, and that's going to call that function. And I get an error here. And the error is because I'm trying to append. When I say append, I mean take a string, this K character, and append it to this number. So I have to turn this number into a string. And how do you do that? Use something called the Cstring function. This is Cstring, and then inside it you put a number, and it takes that number and makes it a string. So now if I go back to the worksheet and copy it down, I actually have to pass in a parameter actually. There we go. So I didn't have the parameter passed in, so I had to put that in. Okay. So now I have something that looks like this, right? That's pretty cool. Let me just change this number here, and I want to show you that I'm not happy right now. And the reason I'm not happy is, yes, it looks like this, but I don't like the fact that there's 5 or 6 ones here, right? I want to do something about it, because the whole point of me scaling this number down is, I want to see less characters than there are in here, and this has more. So, the whole point of scaling it, let's say I needed to use this somewhere, this column, this scale number, is to make it shorter than this, right? So no, it's not. So I have to do something about that. So I'm going to go back in here, and I'm going to do something like this. I'm going to do if the absolute value of the number, and I do absolute value just to make it easy, to compare it to 1,000. If it's less than 1,000, then I'm going to do something else, and if. So what I'm doing here is saying, take the number and take the absolute value of it, and if it's less than 1,000, then I don't want all those extra decimals. So I'm going to round this quantity to 2 decimals, okay? And let's just run this. Let's call the function again. And you can see, okay, now everything less than 1,000, and I have to drag this back up. Everything less than 1,000 is now, once I divide it by 1,000, I round it 2 decimal places, and then I convert it to a string and I add k to it. So now it's looking better, right? I have 111.11 is, what I want to see is 0.11k. Now I know what you're saying. You're saying 0.11 times 1,000. That's 110. That's not 111.11. Well, I'm assuming that I'm okay with that. I'm assuming that when I'm scaling something, I'm okay with some loss of precision. And in this case, I lost $1.11. So I'm going to say, you know what, I'm okay with losing some precision. Okay, so now let's deal with these bigger numbers, 45,000 and such. So the reason those cells were blank here is because they were bigger than 1,000. And when they were bigger than 1,000, they fell into this else condition, but there was nothing there, so they just returned blank. So now I'm going to deal with that. I'm going to go here and I'm going to put scale number. So this is the case where it's bigger than 1,000, and I'm just going to put 0 here because I don't want any decimal places when it's greater than 1,000. So now if I go back here and I run this, I call this function, there you see I have 0.11k, then I have 45k, then I have 0.3k. Remember that I'm okay with that. I'm totally okay with that. So that's going to be $30 instead of 30. This means $30 instead of $34, but I'm okay with that. And as we go down, you see all these are correct. And then we get down here, and I'm not so happy with this, because this again, it's now I'm dealing with a big number, 133,450,000. The K stands for 1,000, right? So this is too big, so I have to do something about this. Well, what I can do now is I can write another function. So I want to do something like this. I want to write another function scale, and I'm going to do scale m, scale standing for scale million, and that is going to take a number as double. It's going to take a number that's a double, and it's going to return a string, right? And all I'm going to do here is to scale million. Remember, you have to do this when you write a function. Whatever's returned has to be in a line like this. You put the name of the function and then it's equal to something. In our case, number divided by 1,000,000, and I got to put the C string around it again. And now I'm going to append big M to it. Okay, and I just need to put another parentheses there. So now, what did I do? I just wrote a function that will take a number. It'll take a number here, and it's going to return that number divided by a million, and then the letter M. So I want to use that function up here. So I want to say something like, if this number is greater than, is actually less than I could do greater than or equal to a million, then I want to call this scale million function. So I want to do scale number is equal to scale million, and I pass in the number that's right here. So I'm just going to pass in number. Okay. Else, this means it's less than a million. Then you're going to do all this stuff right here, which we already wrote, and then I'm just going to end the if. Okay. So that's now we're doing something pretty cool here. We have two functions, and I'm calling one function here within another function. Okay. So this function here actually calls another function, and this number here is the number that's right here. Okay. So I pass in this number. I do some look. I look at it and go, is it greater than a million? If it is, then I pass it on to this function, which is going to return something and put it in scale number. And it never. And if it's the case that if it is the case that it's bigger than a million, then it never touches any of this stuff. Okay. But if it's less than a million, then I look at it. I say, okay, it's less than a million. Then it's going to fall into this stuff, and we already saw what that does. It adds k to it and it rounds it and all that stuff. So now let's go back to the worksheet, and let's just drag this down, and there you go. Okay. So now I have a function, scale number, that takes a number, and if it's less than 1,000, it does stuff, and if it's greater than 1,000, it does stuff, right? So here it's greater than 1,000, it doesn't return any decimal places. If it's less than 1,000, it does return decimal places. And if it's greater than a million, then it does stuff too. It takes a number and divides it by a million. So let me just put in some dummy numbers here. And so I have the same problem here, right? Like, I just want to see two decimal places here. So let me just try to get rid of that using the rounding thing. So I want to go in here, and I just want to do a round in here. And I'm just going to round it to 2. Okay. So now, if I have a $1 million number that has lots of digits that are non-zero, then I'm going to see that. But now that I just made that change, there, I see this. So now we're getting someplace, right? The whole idea of this scaling is to take big numbers and represent them in a way that you can quickly see, you can quickly understand what they are without taking up this much space. So I think we're doing that now. And that is the purpose of this video. That is why I wanted to show you guys how to do this, because if you wanted to take all this logic and put it in a formula, well, you wouldn't go crazy, but you would have a formula that would be very, very long, right? And I don't know, I don't want to write it, but you would have an if statement that says if this is greater than 1,000, greater than a million, then if this is less than 1,000, then do something else, do something here, and then you'd have to end that, and then you'd have another thing here, right, for the false thing. So you could see that this thing would be super long, right? And I just wrote that in there because it's garbage, and because the formula would be very long, and it would look like, it would look way too long, and you don't want to write super crazy long formulas. Instead, just write a simple user-defined function. You could name it whatever you want. You take in a number, and you write your logic in the code right here. And this is more manageable. This is more space saving than some formula that would take up all this, right? So you get the idea what a user-defined function is. It saves you time when you want to manage your formulas, because you don't use a formula at all, you just use a function. So it's time saving, it makes things more understandable, and it'll make your life easier. So let's go in here and let me just search. If I hit that little FX, if I search for something, scale M, will it show up? Okay, so I want to show you that if you want to see your function, maybe we need to go into the object browser. You can go into this object browser here, and if you search for scale, you'll notice that in the VBA project here library, VBA project library, you have a class called module 1, and that module 1 is here. And the members of that class, module 1, are these two members, scale million and scale number. And you just wrote these, right? So you can see the definition, scale million, is a function. It takes a number as a double and it returns a string. This is what I just wrote, right? So I want to remind you that you're writing these functions, but you're also changing the object model. And the object model, if you don't know what that is, watch the video on it. But that is what it's all about, right? Is that why this is so powerful, is that you can add stuff to the object model that can be reused, and it could be easily managed. Because here you have, within a class, you have your members and their functions, and you can very easily see them and then go in and manage them here, right? You just click on the module, and there you're managing your code, you're managing your functions. So that's it. An introduction to user-defined functions. They save a lot of time. They save a lot of space. They are very efficient, although sometimes they're not. I mean, sometimes it's not worth it to write a user-defined function. But in this case, I certainly think it would be, because the formula I would have to write would be very long. Now, if you're good at Excel, yes, then you don't mind writing super long formulas. But when it comes times to manage those, and let's say I wanted to further do other logic here, right? Let's say I wanted to, if it's greater than 50 million, then do something else, or blah, blah, blah. If you have tons of logic going on, your formulas are going to be enormous. Just write a function. I still think might be better in this case to write a function. And in this case, I do, certainly. So, okay, so that's a user-defined function. You could find that workbook with that code in it at excelvbasequel.com. If you have questions on anything or need consulting or anything like that, go to the consulting page or contact me at this contact link. Okay, until the next video, have a good day.